Does the historic relationship between the Jewish community and the Muslim world, the Golden Age, do you believe that that offers a paradigm of how things could be, should be, or how Jewry should approach the non-Jewish world?
Uh, Definitely insofar as, again, we're dealing with a less than ideal situation. We have to remember that ideally Jews are supposed to all be in Israel and all be living a Jewish life. But insofar as it deals with the issue of how to live in diaspora, certainly that is the ideal. That's the role model we'd like to have, is Jews being able to. And by the way, you see this closest in the Orthodox Jewish world in America, which is the largest diaspora community, where Jews can be fairly well integrated and freely operate within a society, a larger society. It's very tolerant and open of them, where there's no persecution. But again, you don't find that same level of accomplishment. If you look at the Yeshiva world of America today, you don't find people excelling in science and doctors and things like that. But at least you find them fully participating while maintaining their own particularism and living within certain communities like Lakewood or Borough Park, or wherever you want to look, or Pico Robertson in LA. So that model has been kind of reproduced, but I don't think we're going to see that kind of relationship in the diaspora ever being reproduced again, because the nature of the Orthodox world is no longer open to being that open to the rest of the world. Where I do see it's interesting is in Israel's relationship in general with its Arab neighbors in the Abraham Accords. That's the area where I think, and he granted, it's not, Israel's not a religious state per se, but here you have a very strongly religious, like, the Emirates and Bahrain. These are very religious people. They're Bedouin, basically. They dress very modestly. They're a very conservative culture, by the way. It's interesting how open they are to creating like a giant Disney World in the Middle East, especially Bahrain, which wants to get 40 million tourists in their country. I think it's Bahrain or Dubai. I'm always confusing who's doing what there. It's built the most beautiful, like a 7-star hotel. They maintain their own extreme particularism, but are extremely welcoming of everything foreign in their country, especially because it brings a massive amount of money. But their women will walk around covered to the hilt, but they'll have Palm Islands of Europeans running around in bikinis. So, and you also have a tremendous interest in recognizing what the Jewish people and the Jewish state has to offer. So you have a great symbiotic relationship where they're totally willing to, now you have people, it's stuff you wouldn't have had even 10 years ago. You have synagogues and Jewish communities opening up in Arab countries, and people wanting to go there and even move there and live there and do business there, in a place that is actually in many ways more stable and safer and greater economic opportunities for Jews living outside of Israel than any place in Europe today. So
Is this a result of a shift in Islam, or is this more because perhaps the leaders of those countries are educated in the West? They want to be perceived as being more culture. They want to fit in more. Is there a shift in Islam now?
I don't think it's a shift. They're just wising up to the fact that they can't rely on oil, and they need to expand outside to become a hub for tourism for investment, for technology, whatever you can do. But it's interesting, they are able to really maintain a very strong particularist ideology. I mean, you go to places like UAE, like almost everyone working there is not, actually a member of the tribes, these families that run the country. They're a small minority of the population. It's all foreign workers. But it's a realization that oil's not going to last forever, and we got to think outside the box and be smart and be open. I'm actually very impressed with their ability. I mean, we should use that in a certain sense. We should look at it. The Orthodox Jewish world should recognize that you can do this too. You don't have to be so reactionary. You can preserve your particularism while benefiting from creating a more open world around you. And it's a good symbiotic relationship. Their countries are going to do great because of it. It's going to be a win-win, and it's opening up a whole new area of investment and innovation in a part of the world that's been so lacking in it for literally 1,000 years. But they're not doing it at the expense of their commitment. Now, long term, it's too early to tell. Will this erode their traditional lifestyle? Will they be able to do it? I don't know. I don't live in that world. I'm not privy to. I don't speak. My Arabic is nowhere near good enough to read their press. But it's interesting that they're trying to do something that no one else in the world is really trying to do. No other faith is certainly trying to do that. Christianity is dying in Europe and only surviving in Africa and South and Central America. Jews are becoming, the Orthodox Jewish world has become more particularist, especially in Israel, while the rest of the Jewish world is disappearing, especially in diaspora in America. So yeah, the question would be, as someone who's living in Israel now 41 years, whether the Orthodox Jewish world, especially the Ashkenazi world, can move out of its insular worldview and have less fear factor and realize that we can be more welcoming and interactive. I think that would be the best thing for Israel. I think it's the great hope of Israel, and I think it's vital for the future of Israel that happen, because such a closed world is not economically sustainable, and it causes great divisions within Israeli society. Have groups of people that so little interact with each other as the secular Israeli world of Tel Aviv and the very insular Orthodox world of places, especially like Mei Sharim and Geula and Bnei Brak. So yeah, very interesting.
Your contentions, because if you look throughout history, you look at what we perhaps would look at and say these are Maimonides, enlightened, but yet, as you just pointed out, what's happening in some of the Gulf states, Maimonides did not give up an inch in terms of his belief and Jewish traditional law and adherence. So if you really look at it, he had that, but yet he was able to do more and go beyond. Is that what you're referring to in terms of?
Exactly. But it means it's a whole nother interesting discussion. I have like 10 PhD theses I'm never going to get to write, but they're all fascinating. The Ashkenazi Jewish world, it's interesting, the Sephardi world, even though the vast majority of Jews became Ashkenazi as the expulsion from Spain and European, then they were expelled from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, and then from the last 500 years, Eastern Europe pre-Holocaust became the center of the Jewish world. That the Sephardi world that survived became less intellectually creative. Because the world amongst which we live, Jews always, you can't live in a vacuum. When you live in an enlightened world, the enlightenment of the outside seeps into your culture. It opens up more opportunities for subcultures and subgroups to take advantage of that. When the Muslim world kind of goes into this retrograde, doctors and lawyers are not really jobs you have in the Middle East. It's like a very third world, it becomes a very third world backward place, which ultimately is colonized largely by Europeans. But what happens is that world, up until modern times, and the anti-Jewish violence that's triggered by the birth of Israel and the rise of Zionism in the 20th century, that Sephardi world, while it loses its great innovation. You have much fewer great Sephardi rabbis, much fewer Jews there, and much fewer economic, like all the Nobel Prize winners of the last 100 years, of which Jews were 0.2% of the world's population, have 22% of the Nobel Prizes, is I think probably 100% Ashkenazi. But that Sephardi world never went through the massive trauma that the Ashkenazi Jewish world has gone through for 1,000 years. And it maintained a level of openness and normalcy until modern times, which was much more inclusive. Whereas the Ashkenazi world first goes through physical trauma at the hands of non-Jews, and then massive spiritual trauma at the hands of the Enlightenment and secular Jews, be they the Reform movement, secular Zionism, the communist, Bundist, left-wing Jews, who are all attacking mainstream traditional orthodoxy, as we call it today, on a spiritual level. So we start bleeding out Jews in massive numbers, not physical blood, but spiritual blood and loss. So that Jewish world has largely self-ghettoized and lost its ability to be like a Maimonides, to achieve. You almost never meet. I'm a tour guide. I took a guy on tour a few days ago who's a doctor. He's an internal medicine guy. And he's a very religious-looking guy. And he's the black clothing and the hat and everything. And I said, and of course, and I said, I've never met an ultra-Orthodox Jew who's raised Orthodox who's a doctor, because the system is always geared towards learning. And in a Jewish phase, it's secular always at the expense of secular education. And all the yeshiva guys that I know from Lakewood and stuff are all in businesses now, like the Sephardim were in, because white-collar jobs are not open to them because they lack the academic credentials. They're all doing investments and nursing homes and all kinds of business opportunities. So we seem to have lost the role models, or the desire or the ability or the willingness or the openness to recreate those kind of Jews who lived in a place like Spain 1,000 years ago plus, who could be the best of the best of Jews as rabbis and Torah scholars and incredibly innovative people making a difference in this world in other areas, which I think would be great, by the way. I think it'd be the biggest Kiddush Hashem would be to have Jews who can make an impact and make a difference in the world outside that area and interact with the non-Jewish world. Just like Israel does so much innovation, which the world benefits from, which reflects well in Israel, the Jewish world as a Jewish world would be, I think it would be better for us internally and certainly better for the world externally if we were able to do that.
This has been fascinating. We did a very broad look at Jewish history, Jews, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and hopefully maybe at some point we can go through some of the 10 PhD topics that are on your desk and tackle those in the future as well. So again, Rabbi Ken Spiro, thank you. Again, the books that we mentioned of Rabbi Spiro, we urge all our listeners and viewers to take a look at them. World Perfect, Crash Course in Jewish History, Why a Tiny Nation Plays Such a Huge Role in History, and Rabbi Spiro's articles, all different publications, and of course on the Aish HaTorah site. Rabbi Spiro, again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. By the way, I have a good website of my own, kenspiro.com. All my content is online for free.
kenspiro.com. Please go to the website. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.